Yes, okay, thanks. So we have a really nice panel here, and most of them you have met already. We have the facilitator of the debate, Per Christian Magnus, who is a reporter for a Norwegian broadcaster, NRK. And we also have a guest from the United States, the University of Virginia, Deborah Johnson, who is a professor of ethics there, and also has a 20% position in our project. So we're very excited about that. So I will just leave the word to Per Christian.
Ja, mitt navn er altså Per Christian Magnus. My name is Per Magnus. I work as a journalist and a documentary filmmaker at NRK, the national broadcaster, and I teach the students, the journalist students here at the university. And shamefully, I'm ashamed, but I must admit that my first real introduction to Snapchat was last night when Yusuf met with the students. It was mind-blowing for me. By the way, Yusuf just arrived last afternoon, went to the hotel, had a quick shower, went straight up to meet the students, and spent two wild hours with the students last night before hopefully getting some hours sleep this night and doing his presentation here today and work with the students here. And as you see, he's now still, multitasking guy. He's editing or curating the snapshots from the students today, which will be presented in the end. First of all, to bring this all together and comment on today's speeches, I will ask Deborah Johnson. As you said, she's a very world-renowned researcher especially on ethics and technology, and a professor of the University of Virginia, and also involved in the project here in Bergen. I read an article a year ago, which you called, Deborah, "Don't Fear the Robots." To what extent do you fear the transformation of media and the way we are, news are conveyed today? I mean, the role of social media like Snapchat and Facebook. Are you fearing anything in that kind of development we're seeing?
So this would be a perfect lead into my comments on the. I wouldn't use the language of fear, but I think I was going to start off by saying we have to step back whenever it comes to a new technology and think about and ask what is it affording, but also at the same time ask what is it constraining. How is it making things, what is it facilitating, so I think you always have to ask, are there things we should worry about as whether, along with what are the good things. And the other thing I wanted to sort of bring up was, whenever there's a new technology, I think it's really important to ask both, what is it changing, or how are things changing, but also what's staying the same. And actually, I'll say a little bit more about that in a second, about how journalism and news media or media may be changing and staying the same. And the other sort of big question to ask is, we tend to think of, have this idea that new technologies come on the scene, come into a new domain, and they change that domain. And we never think about the other way, that the domain that they're coming into is actually shaping what the technologies are, because the technologies are malleable too, especially information technologies of this kind. So those are the big sort of background things. The papers, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody. It was really, the papers were great. They're stimulating and very diverse. So it's hard to bring them all together. But let me try to do something here. I thought it was, I don't know if it was designed this way, but I thought it was interesting. The way I saw it is, Yusuf's paper was about production of news, or production of information or stories. And then the other papers touched on, and actually he touched on as well, but things you might call further down the stream, where it's not just the production of content content, but also delivery, distribution, use, effects, etc. And so I was thinking about how whether or not we focus on iPhones or information technology in general, they afford things at every stage. But even if we just started off with a change in the way news is produced, let's say, or information is produced, however you want to talk about that, that in itself would cause changes down the road, especially in this case where what changes in production, that at least the change that Yusuf emphasized was that we now have something much more like crowdsourcing of news. We have many more people, or at least the possibility of many more people being involved. So that alone would require us to rethink, and it just requires changes in the way that content is then edited or filtered or organized and delivered and used. And it seems like, again, this is being somewhat critical, but it seems like we're too much focused on production. I shouldn't say too much focused on production, but we're focused on production, and the real work that needs to be done is in those the changes, sort of what I'd call downstream. And one of the questions brought this out. I think one of the big issues that always hits home for me is that we just, as a consumer of media, is just the huge quantity of information I'm now dealing with, everybody has to deal with, which makes that the filtering and organizing so much more important, critical. And again, I don't know that enough attention is being paid to that. You can argue with me about that. So the other thing I just wanted to mention that kind of kept lurking there for me was whenever you have a new technology coming into a new domain, the other thing you have to worry about is what are the values that are either shaping the change, or what are the values that are being shaped and changed. Sometimes people worry, I've heard these arguments made that what you really want to worry about, at least in the case of information technologies, is that you might have something like education or banking or whatever information technology comes in, and over time, as the technology permeates the institution, ultimately the goals or purposes of the whole institution changes. Well, I won't go into those examples, I'll just do it here. So I began thinking about this in terms of media, and in particular in journalism and news reporting, and whether or not these new technologies are actually changing the goals or the purposes of these institutional arrangements that we have, and thinking about the values. So, of course, the traditional values have to do with accuracy and reliability, and probably most important, the trust that people have, and I think those are certainly being affected. But the other thing that I was more wondering about, and this is kind of maybe a question for all of you, is certainly I think of the goal, maybe it makes it too simple to call it a goal, but the function, the purpose, the ultimate good of media, in particular news reporting and journalism, is information, informing the public. But I also think of it as, in the US we have this phrase, we call it the fourth estate. It has had this role of holding power accountable, holding people in power accountable. And I don't have a strong sense that information technologies and in particular cell phones are changing that so much, except to have this sense that much more of the emphasis is on, well, I guess if I want to get myself in trouble, I would say much more emphasis on entertainment than on, and even more on information to the neglect of this kind of accountability, holding power accountable. And again, I think sort of generically about technology, I think this is one of the things that you have to look deeply at. What is it that the technology enables that would push it in that direction? And what are the forces that are already out there even before the technology comes that pushes to have the technology used in that way? So that's the kind of set of questions. I'd like to think about the values and the ultimate purposes and functions. And then finally, I just wanted to, I have to say something about privacy, because privacy came up in almost every one of the talks, I think. So privacy does seem to be the biggie. It's always been, here we go back to what changes, what stays the same. I think to some extent privacy has always been an issue for journalism and media. That is, journalists have had to make sometimes very difficult decisions about what to keep private and when not to, when to reveal what might be sensitive information. So we seem to have a case where that issue gets exacerbated and gets expanded and extended in sort of new and different and very difficult to manage ways. And I haven't got a clue how to solve this one. I really wish I did. In my own work, I think I've told some other people this, I sort of made a shift a couple years ago from not focusing so much on privacy and flip to surveillance. And I saw that as a shift from myself sort of watching, instead of watching looking at people being watched, I thought it was more interesting to look at the watchers and find out why people were so interested in watching, surveilling rather than being surveilled. And the thing that I think kind of worries me the most about all of the new technologies when it comes to media is that media just becomes part of this surveillance. It just permeates the world. And it does worry me that, especially when it comes to journalism and news media, which relies so heavily on trust, that when those institutions become part of the surveillance society, we're in big trouble. So,
thank you.
Comment. I'm looking for responses.
Just first of all, there will be a big chunk of time for question and answers afterwards. And if you have a very important point of view or argument you would like to present during the conversation, please make Frode or me aware of you. I will allow that. Yusuf, can I ask you a question now?
Well, I want to respond to a few things. I totally agree that it's very difficult in the social media space to do news because you are competing with entertainment. Your timeline, you're sharing the space with funny cat videos and a UFC fight. In India, if you want to go viral, you've got to do three things: Bollywood, cricket, and right-wing politics. And try and maintain editorial value in that space is incredibly difficult. And on top of that, you've spoken about being distracted by these technologies as opposed to focusing on the storytelling. It's true, but it's about looking behind those technologies and seeing what storytelling applications are there. Snapchat was never designed for sexual abuse. Musical.ly, which is another popular app, was never designed for journalistic storytelling. But see where the market is and see how we can use that to deliver in that space. And then the surveillance idea is coming up time and time again, this idea that all of this is effectively infringing on our privacy. But the thing is, at least for my generation, we overshare everything. The old saying was that the greatest fear of Orwell, George Orwell, was that we'd have a big brother state and cameras would be watching over us. But in actuality, I'm the one holding the camera, and the greatest fear is that nobody's watching. And I think we share because, for my generation at least, it's empowered us. We've used Tinder and we've swiped and found our first loves. The Arab Spring has used Twitter and they've given birth to revolutions. I even order my Uber using it. So we are yet to feel the bite or the downside of giving away our data. We've only seen positive things. We found jobs, we found love stories. And I think that's why we're not as suspicious. And we're willing to overshare because we feel it's our way of connecting with the world.
When it comes to if new technology is changing values and changing goals, do you see yourself? You said today that social media for social good. Do you see yourself as part of a long tradition, a press tradition? I mean, or are you coming out with new values, coming out with new goals compared to us, the older generations?
I believe that the original pretense of journalism is actually to be very much a fly on the wall, to mirror society and observe its flaws and to highlight those flaws. I think digital journalism, because of the ability for people to interact with the situation, has taken it a step further towards what we call constructive journalism, the ability to have an impact and make a difference. So I think we are no longer, especially in the social media space where there's so much noise, I think the space for just saying, hey, here's the story is not enough anymore. People want insight, they want context. And I think that's why, if you look at Breitbart, for example, the right-wing channel that was doing a lot of the pro-Trump coverage, a lot of what we'd call fake news, one of the things that people liked about them, for better or worse, is that they contextualized social media. So I think that my role, using social media for social good, goes beyond reporting just the facts, saying this is what happened, but helping people understand why it's important and letting them know how they can help.
Jon Arne, Markussen, what is your response to what Yusuf just said?
When it comes to the Arabic Spring, Omar, I would say that I thought many of us were in a way trusting that social media were going to solve thing in the Middle East. It didn't. Maybe there is the situation in Tunis was where it worked very well, but it went wrong most other places and didn't help out. What I would say to Debbie, I sense that you are a little bit more pessimistic on behalf of the journalism that I am. I would say that it's always been the way that journalism have been following the technology and starting to use technology wherever way it came out. And I think that's what we see also now. So it's in a way up to us who are there and has been there for a long time to overlook this and work hard to handle these fantastic tools that, for instance, social media are. It's something about keeping an eye on, being accurate, playing the watchdog, and using the distribution possibility it really gives us. The reach has increased fantastic. My paper, and I have been on this trip for a long time. In the early 90s, Dagbladet on print had a circulation of 220, 30,000 copies a day in small Norway, and that's a lot. We had a reach of 900,000 people. Today, the print edition is very small, but we have a strong position in the digital thing, and we reach out to 1.5 million people. And we communicate very well with them throughout the day, 24 hours a day. And so I think it's something about, it's up to us. So there is many reasons to be worried. It has to do with resources and stuff like that. But from my point of view, I think it's, well, we are punished. And why are we punished? The media branch as a whole in Norway, and I think also in the United States, we're very lazy and slow in the 90s, and we didn't see what was coming. And we didn't prepare for the technological revolution. We made so much money on TV, on print, and we didn't prepare very well. So when it really happened, we were like taken by surprise. Today, I was worried a few years ago, I have to admit that. But from my point of view, things look brighter now. And I think it has to do also with the fact that I see there's several things. The fake news wave in itself will help us to look back and see who can we trust in this picture. That's one thing. The other thing is all of us are now trying to build up premium subscriber editions. And what we see is there is a breakthrough, there is a willingness to pay for content, but it has to be unique, it has to be high quality, it has to be good. And that's also the reason why I think there is hope for the journalism. You cannot fool around, you have to simply to make high quality stuff. I also have to see that how the advertisers now are starting to react. They are very, very much aware of the fact, hey, where are we going to send our customers? What kind of context are we going to send them into? They want to work with us because they want to be in a context where they are not ashamed of being. And at least the advertisers are going to start thinking that way. That's what we see a tendency to. So I think there is many things now who work in the right direction.
I don't know if you were worried about that, but Yusuf, you used the notion curating. Curating, like Snapchat uses that word. But still, your job title is editor. What are the implications of curating and not being editor?
Sure. So as a conventional editor, what are you doing? You are curating wire copy, you're curating your reporters in the field, you're curating a whole bunch of sources. For me, the access to sources has just exploded, but the actual job title for journalists has always included the form of curation. We've always had to have lots of ears and eyes on the ground. We just have more than before. Of course, curation often has the context of an art gallery curating pictures, but I see it as something else. I see it as having a God's eye window of tons of screens all the time and being able to draw on those resources.
But what about the traditional editing role, the role as an editor? How do you bring that into the curating field?
It gets infinitely more difficult because they've got more decisions to make. And to be frank, going forward with the billions and billions of smartphones, I don't think they can manually do that. We don't have the human capacity to go through as much data and as much visuals as we see coming through. So we're going to have to rely on technology. If 50 people in this room are taking an image of me right now, we can use face mapping technology, which you guys have been speaking about, to really accurately verify that therefore Yusuf must be speaking in that room at that time. So we're going to have to rapidly bring on board these sorts of fact-checking technologies into our newsrooms if we're going to cope with this massive amount of content coming through.
That is, I completely agree with that. I think that's the daunting challenge, and that's why I think it's not, I wouldn't say I'm pessimistic at all, but I think it's not going to be without some bumps along the way, because I think that's just an enormous, yeah.
And then you're going to have to think about, there'll be biases built into these algorithms.
Into the algorithms.
There'll be cases where people who, for some reason, really shouldn't, maybe they'll be outed as gay, or their abusive husband will find them, or something rather, because the algorithm will pinpoint them as being present. There's all sorts of challenges involved. I think you're right, too, that this is the way it's going to be going, clearly.
The other fundamental challenge is that publishers are not winning this game. Platforms are. So if we're saying platforms, publishers, newspapers, media houses need to start curating people, Snapchat have been doing this for the last year and a half, 2 years. So the risk is that we're not going to win this game. And if we have to start charging people for quality content, my generation, at least in India, are not willing to pay. They've had access to free online news for the last 20 years, and you're suddenly going to say to them, you actually need to start paying for this now. So if the walled garden, if the subscription model isn't the answer to our generation, it has to be other forms of revenue. We have to start taking into account content marketing. But yet, when I go to the Washington Post and New York Times, and you mention the idea that maybe we should be doing some sponsored content, you're like the devil. They start putting holy water on you and like, this is journalism, get out of here. I agree. Journalists have to keep the stuff in arm's length away, otherwise we lose our journalistic integrity. But to totally diminish it as a form of revenue is going to be to our own demise.
Do you see any difficulties, Jon, about the responsibility, the traditional responsibility of publishers towards, curating a lot of selfies from around the world?
Well, of course. I mean, I don't see that any clearer than they do themselves. I think, of course, it's a challenge because it's so massive, quick, and all the foot soldiers in the field, they're changing character too. They're civilians and amateurs, and that's all very different. But I think I agree with Yusuf, and as I understand you, it's, this technology isn't just making challenges, it's also giving opportunities. So it's just learning to use the technology to fix things, to try and stick to the principles. And what I always do in these contexts, and which is, the historian's work actually, is we can always learn something from history. I mean, when technological innovation rears its ugly head, as it often does, and sometimes in huge paradigm shifts, like the internet and then version 2 with social media, these things have their parallels. I mean, when the printing press was invented in the late Middle Ages, I mean, the ruling classes, which was basically the Pope and the Catholic Church in Europe, they went apeshit. Everything was just going to go, this was Sodom and Gomorrah. People were going to be able to, Luther was going to be able to spread his, heresy all over the continent, and everything was going to fall apart. And of course, the church's power did fall apart, at least the Catholic churches, but it led to enlightenment, and with a few pains and a little bloodshed, some revolutions, we got democracy, which I think most of us think was a good development. And next time, we have information technology. When TV came, look at the history of how lawmakers and others reacted to when television came. And again, I can speak for the European context. Suddenly you had special regulations for one particular medium, because this was so powerful and dangerous that the printed press, which had normal regulations which we're still used to, a lot of freedom of the press and a certain checks there, but in the European level you had TV directives which were like, what do you call them, tight suits? There was straight suits on the media until late 90s, early 2000s. Then the new media came and they realized, look, these guys, they're not just doing traditional broadcasting, which we're regulating. Now they're doing things online over IP, which was outside the definition of broadcasting. We have to broaden this directive to cover the online world. And what happened then, the broadcasters, they'd always accepted this because they came from the public. They were children of the state, public service broadcasters. The editors of the normal free press, suddenly the EU was trying to regulate them for their online, and they were going, no way. We're independent. The state doesn't meddle with how we deal and how we do our stuff. And then they suddenly had to say, oh, okay, no, we can't touch them. They're going to go apeshit. So now they have this audio-visual media services directive, which only covers what happens online if it's TV-like. And it's going to fall. Next time they're going to try and amend this, it's all going to fall apart, is my view. And we've survived TV as well as societies. It hasn't fallen completely apart, and we've survived the internet, and we're going to survive. But the challenge is, of course, that we need professional publishers, I think. We need editors. When Alan Rusbridger he's given many talks, he gave one in Oslo because he was awarded an honorary doctorate at the University of Oslo. He talked about the Snowden case. I'm sorry, it's a bit lengthy, but I think this is really it's such an interesting point he made, because the public doesn't quite understand the importance. Of course, a live picture from what's happening on the street right there in Aleppo, that picture doesn't matter who took it. But in bigger context, putting things into context and making something understandable of it. He said the Snowden files that they received He said, you haven't seen them. They're massive, and they make no sense to me. We needed to use lots of resources, technology, experts on technology who understood what all these documents meant, what they implied, specialists in many areas, and I've only used a minute part of it, and they presented it to us as the public in an editorial context where they put it into context with historical events, I mean, things that we take for granted when we read it. Well, this is simple, now we understand what's going on. But if you'd just done like, say, WikiLeaks used to do, just dumped all the documents on the internet, it wouldn't have made a difference. People wouldn't have understood what it was until someone picked it up and did something with it and actually edited it and presented it in the context. And that's, if I'm worried about something, it's the lack of appreciation in the public today of what editorial work actually means, what quality there is in that. And it's difficult to see on the face, because when you get served something, it's like, fine, this is good, I like it. But to understand the difference between what's been done with all the raw material, all the sources that are put together, which the hobby publishers out there, which are you and me, my kids, publishing, I mean, they're never gonna, they're a part of the big ecosystem here, and you can use them, but we still need the professional publishers to make sense of a lot of the stuff, at least. Some things are easy. They're just, this is happening here, that's a fact, that's all. But sometimes things are happening here and there, and they happened 20 years ago there, and you put it together and it gives you a completely different picture. And that, you don't do that in a snap. You do that with...
Jill, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think some of the problem, I agree we need this work to be done, and I do appreciate having an independent press very much. But I think part of the problem is that the press also does a terrible job. I mean, there is so much clickbait, there's so many things where any reader can tell they just want me to click on that, and it's nonsense, you know. And there's also really high quality material that's not made by professionals, like stories. There are some people on Snapchat, for instance, who aren't affiliated with anything, that tell really good direct stories. There are big projects like the Wikipedia, for instance, which has its issues, but it also does an amazing job of collating a lot of information and presenting it in a reasonable fashion. I think one issue which I'd really like to ask, because you're from newspapers, among other things. And platforms like Facebook, Snapchat, well, I don't know about Snapchat, but Facebook is very clear that it's not a media, it's not what they say, not a media platform, they're a technology platform, is that the words? Yeah. To what extent or something like Snapchat then, which would seem more like a media platform since they do create content. Many newspapers do have apps. You're imagining like a digital, like an app for Dagbladet in the future. What about making media platforms into technology platforms? And for instance, if you've got 1 million people looking at the Dagbladet app, why not invite them to contribute things and hire, 50 curators or something like that? And it's really to both of you, because you've also asked individuals to be your eyes, but not really opened it up to everyone. So why not?
Yeah, it's a fantastic point, Jill, especially where you raised Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it does democratize the process of truth and false, and at least one pair of eyes has to see a piece of content before it goes out, and it sort of, it works to a degree. I think that you were talking about the need for press organizations to have verifications. I think they also need to start showing the audience that verification. Exactly. We need to start, if there's a story that's gone out, here's our sources, here's how we've verified it, because that then adds a little bit of value. In terms of media organizations doing the curation, they have tried. CNN did iReport, but your Twitters, your YouTubes, your Facebooks of the world, they're doing it infinitely better because of their enormous pool of people. And I think the question we have to ask, we acknowledge then that we need editors. We need people to sort this out. Do those editors lie with the publishers, or do they lie with the platforms? Because at the moment, in this arena of fake news, everyone's calling on Facebook. Facebook, you need an editor to help sort this stuff out. Facebook, you need to start pulling down all these right-wing posts. Do we really want to give Facebook that kind of power? Do we really want them to become censors? For me, that's a slippery slope. We should still hold on to that power.
Johan.
For God's sake, don't ask Facebook for an editor. That's really going to be a mess. For me, it's a distribution platform. I know I have colleagues that don't agree with me, but I don't look at Facebook as kind of a place where you have an editorial staff with an editor. No, and please don't ask for it.
But we just have to be careful here. This is really enormously complicated, and it will sort itself out anyway. But don't dismiss Facebook, because if indeed Facebook uses an economic model that's promoting Facebook, then there's something they can do, which is change the model so that they're not paying people on the basis of how good the fake stuff is, how fake the fake stuff is. Yeah. So they're not. They can't. You can't sort of just. That's what I think. Why I say I can't sort it out. But it's not just going to be so and so is going to be the editor and so isn't. You know, it's going to be sorted out in a lot of. And what I can't. What I still sort of think is the problem is. All these different functions are merging, and then they're going to have to sort back out. In other words, the entertainment, the news, the community organizing, you know, civic engagement. It's all just sociality, all coming. And that's why I thought your question about public-private was so interesting to me, because it seems to me one of the things that's happening is social life, just our sociality as humans is now online, and it's commercialized and privatized, which I think is pretty revolutionary. I mean, it's never been. Used to be our social lives were local, primarily, and we had much more control over them. So entertainment, socialization, news, information, it's all.
Yeah, what's really happening with us? I mean, when Yusuf came in this morning, he came in with an iPhone behind him. He was talking to an iPhone, and he very cleverly included us after a while. But still, he was, you know, focused on that one, like you are now. I mean, when we make the whole world crowd journalists, really mostly talking to that one and not to each other, what happens to us? What's happened to social structures?
On my side, I've seen justice. I've seen Black Lives Matter protesters, men and women who have been gunned down because of nothing, police brutality, and their mobile phones has been quite simply the only way to authenticate their stories, to verify the injustices that have happened to them. So on my side, I see more angles, more truths, more perspectives. The days of a big, old, to be fair, white man in a tower saying this is news and this is how to understand the world are gone. So I only see positives.
Do you see Snapchat as a barrier towards what you can call bad populism, or the opposite? I mean, populism is another notion we are using a lot now, like fake news and post-facta, etc. Is that a tool to oppose that kind of bad populism?
Not really. Snapchat, because of its lack of discovery, because of the lack of ability to make something go viral, means that your story can only travel so far and so fast. Whereas a platform like Twitter or Facebook, despite Twitter seeing numbers diminishing, still have a massive potential to leverage. So in that way, no. I think Snapchat is far more personal than that. And I think Snapchat have a far greater, Jill and I were talking about it earlier, they're actually quite dangerous because everybody's allowed to play on Snapchat. But if you want to have a sense of professionalism, if you want to curate your story, if you want to add graphics and text and do all these sorts of things, you have to be part of their Discover system. A little walled garden. Everybody else has to play outside of those rules. So they have literally monetized the ability to be discovered. And that's something that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram didn't do. Those are all basically level playing fields. Everyone's got an equal opportunity. If you've got a compelling story to tell, there's no reason why you can't go viral. So in that respect, Snapchat's dangerous. And I suppose that means we should be suspicious of all platforms equally.
But at the same same time, Snapchat's clearly like, it's a liberal US, I mean, it's millennials. They're pro-gay, they're pro, immigration, they have a clear political stance in their life stories, even in the Discover stuff that they do. So I don't think they're the biggest danger for populism. Of course, populism is certainly spread in social media. Any niche is going to grow with social media.
Let's talk more about privacy. All of you have been talking about that. I mean, is the next new growing business something helping us to hide? Are we now, seen by cameras all over, so we need new spaces, new rooms to hide away?
I think we have heaps of new rooms. Someone was remarking that their kids in their 20s don't use Facebook. They use Messenger, though, and they have secret groups. I think, people of our generation and older are not so good at finding the private spaces on the internet, but younger people use, secret Tumblrs, or they use pseudonyms, or they have private Instagrams, for instance. And that's one of the reasons why Snapchat has been so popular, because it's easy to make that kind of private space.
Deborah, you said it's the biggie. This is biggie now. You said that privacy is the biggie now.
Yeah, well, I think that what Yusuf said about the millennial generation being so used to sharing is probably our best hope, because they're not going to put up with the kind of things happening that I'm worried about. And this is one of these cases where there really is a kind of generational thing, in the sense that I hear him say that, and I think, I hope he's right, but there is this past experience, like history, of totalitarian control, and we have built this infrastructure which is just perfect for a totalitarian leader to take over and just flip a switch, and everything we do is... And I don't know whether that's like holding us, a kind of bad thing to have a history that we should forget, and some histories we should forget, or whether it's just that this new generations are going to have to learn it the hard way. Honestly, I don't know. But I think there's some promise that once people kind of get used to this kind of open and sharing, they won't put up. Let me just add one thing. So, if you keep up with the details of the American politics, we recently had this incident where Trump wanted all the staff members of the EPA who had gone to conferences on climate change. He just asked for that as part of his transition thing. Well, that's the kind of thing that's, you sit down to a computer and you can just, it's there. And what he was going to do with that, we can only speculate. We speculate that he was going to fire those people rather than, so it's not like there's not reason to be concerned. It's that there won't be people interested in this information that's out there about you. I mean, one of the reasons the 25-year-olds don't put so much on Facebook is because they've now learned that their employers do go look at their drunken pictures and worry, anyway, yeah. Anyway, so I just don't know.
John, do we need new legislation?
No. No, I think new legislation. I think what I said earlier implies what I mean there. No, generally, you don't need new legislation just because technology shifts, at least in this area, freedom of expression, etc. The principles, they work in this new terrain as well. So for God's sake, keep the legislators away. Their normal reaction is always when something's new, we need new copyright law because of online. Now we have surveillance. It's not only the NSA. In Norway, kind little government here, they proposed legislation to do electronic surveillance on all our communication, as they say, defending our digital borders, which is bullshit. There are no digital borders. They have nothing to do with geographical borders. What it means is they'll be doing, if Parliament accepts this, which I hope they don't, they'll be doing surveillance of basically 90% of all our electronic activity in Norway. whether or not it's between two Norwegians or not, because these things cross borders. We communicate with servers, and if you're on Facebook, it's cross-border communication. You're communicating with the server outside. This is stuff they're selling to the public because the public is stupid, because they think, oh, it's new. People are communicating. Criminals can communicate. Ooh, that's dangerous. That's what we have to be worried about, that area of privacy, but also how media still tries to respect privacy, because freedom of expression and privacy are actually interdependent. You often see the media as conflicting with privacy because the court cases are between someone saying, oh, you defamed me or published my personal image, I'll sue you. So they do clash. But in the bottom line, and the best example is protection of sources. That's a combination, I mean, the protection of private communication, which sources, journalist protection, communication is a part of privacy, which is necessary to exercise freedom of expression with any substance. Because the information, if you don't have any information, it's not interesting to have freedom of expression. And that needs to be understood by the public and the politicians, but the media, at least, who are so dependent on our behalf on privacy in that context, need to respect it themselves. So, no, if we need, the only area I think we do need to watch the legislation is protecting not privacy as in what the media can publish, but data protection. Protection of the personal information and all the data which is everywhere. I think that is important, because that will at least undermine what we understand with democracy today if there is no more privacy. And I know people are saying the young people, the millennials, they're happy, they share their information, and whatever you do with consent is fine by me. I'm quite liberal there. But in my capacity, and I mean, I'm in a small jurisdiction, I have those clients now who suddenly see this backfiring. The young people who are not so young anymore, they're closing on their 30s now. They did something stupid once, maybe they published it themselves, or maybe someone else published something about them. They're wanting to see, how can I get this off the net now? I didn't get that job because...
I think that's...
And there people are now, and it's difficult to get rid of these things, so to some of them, and I'm not original there, but I've told some of them, in the worst case, I said, I think, first of all, change your name. It doesn't help completely, I mean, with facial recognition and everything, but get a new name. That's going to help a lot, because people aren't going to get those hits Googling your name anymore. And so I don't believe that we're going to get a generation which forever is happy with their privacy sort of just being obsolete. It is backfiring for certain individuals, and it's going to happen for more individuals as time goes by. So I don't think we're finished with that. Neither with the discussion nor with people's perspective or perception of what's going on.
I think that goes back to Jill's speech, where she said that this ideology that the internet has to last forever, that it has to have this endless archive, is not true. It's just one perspective. And I think that's what's given incredible rise to ephemeral content like Snapchat, like Instagram live stories. The realization that people don't want to have stuff that's going to hamper their job prospects, that they can have a good night out and it will just last that 24-hour period. I think social media platforms that can tap into the weaknesses that currently exist within the social sphere will prevail in the coming years. Deborah, you made a very, very valid point that tyrant states and basically dictators can use social media platforms, fake news, disseminate terrible lies, and get a message out very quickly. But if we look at history, as you rightfully pointed out, the majority of these cases have used traditional media and they've used state-run television stations. In Rwanda, they used radio stations. So this notion that we can use social media for evil was done for a very, very long time with traditional media. If anything, social media is offering the opportunity for people to overcome that. And what do we see in Turkey? What do we see in Egypt at the first sign of any sort of civil unrest? They clamp down on social media because they realize that that is where people are going to find their voices.
But this is a question from one very poorly educated into the SoMe world. But we read about hacking of Snapchat. and you told us how you're using these filters for these ladies, sexually abused ladies. Filters have been hacked before, haven't they? I mean, can you say more about the proofness of using filters or authenticating stories, videos you get from outside, etc.? Say some more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I frequently get the question, people ask, well, how do we know that using Snapchat face filters to hide the identities of sexual abuse survivors, that those can't be removed afterwards? People have asked Snapchat, they haven't given any firm response, but we can tell you that the data file that's omitted when we save that file is far too small to have any raw data behind it, to be able to manipulate it to an extent to recover that image. You could use the same argument for whether we pixelate or blur out somebody's face on television and the ability to hear their voice and to track back to their original form. I think we can do the best that we possibly can. If we use the legal term beyond reasonable doubt, that we've used every possible effort to hide their identities.
But it still is possible to fake the location on Snapchat, isn't it? I mean, I could snap from Bergen and fake being in New York.
You can't. So you can pull a video or a photo in from your memories, from your camera roll, and the app clearly marks it as such by putting a white outline saying this is an archived piece of material. If you are snapping, and in a traditional sense, if I put a Bergen filter on, you have to be in Bergen. If I put that timestamp, you have to be there. And I think social media is going to increasingly have to bring on board these certification processes, these geolocation stamps, these time location stamps, anything to help us authenticate that what people say is happening is really happening.
I think that's interesting because it's so hard to make these generalizations about social media or this or that. The details matter. And by the way, you were sort of denigrating a little bit legislation or regulation. You know, some people say who deal with technology that technology is a form of regulation. That's now how we're being regulated. And it's these details that make the difference between what the law, quote, law is. In other words, you could have systems in which you could be in Bergen and appear to be in New York and nobody would know. You could build the infrastructure that way.
Arguably, people choose Snapchat because it does have those regulations. Right. And also because one interesting thing about Snapchat that's often forgotten is that people can see you seeing them. I mean, if you look at my story, I can see your name in the list of people who viewed my story. If I take a screenshot of one of your images, I mean, there are some ways around it, but there's this basic assumption that if I look at you, you can tell that I'm looking at you, which is very different from many other social media.
It's funny, people often say, well, Snapchat lacks analytics. It lacks the ability to see how many people have viewed, all these sorts of things. But the numbers that it does give you, as you rightfully say, Jill, are actually quite creepy. I call it creepy analytics because you can see exactly who's watched every single shot. And the potential for that is awesome because it means you can go and individually thank each person for watching your video. On Facebook, I know 800 people have watched my video, and by watched, I mean they watched the first 3 seconds for it to validate that it is a watch, or 10 seconds on YouTube. But I don't know who it is, and knowing who is powerful information to have.
Say something more about, you said to the students last night that you think most news will be live in a few years' time.
Yeah.
Almost all news will be live. What are we seeing then? I mean, are we not going to read articles anymore, seeing reportages anymore? Are we just watching live?
I think we will have articles, and I think when we do have articles, it would be like at the Hindustan Times. We publish an article, and then we have the author of the article do a Facebook Live immediately afterwards. So that it gives the opportunity for the audience to discuss it, to debate it, to contribute to future stories, and obviously to punt our piece. You have the report on one side, you have the article on the next. You've got the comment section where we plug more articles that then send them to other parts of our content, constantly migrating. Right now I'm doing a Facebook Live. There's 14 people watching it. In total, it'll rack up to the thousands. I think people want raw, organic, real content, and there's nothing more real than being live. The best thing about live is that I've got somebody from Tanzania watching right now. He's talking about cybercrime laws and the kind of limitations that offers for social media. We can bring people from Tanzania into the conversation here in Norway. And on top of that, we can give him a chance to determine where this narrative goes. He can ask a question and he could steer this entire conversation forward. So we, again, are democratizing this discussion beyond the 50 or so people in this room and 5 people on the panel to the entire world. And that's an important discussion to have. I think where the US media fell short amongst the elections is that they had cocoons of live coverage. You had a bunch of Fox presenters, a bunch of CNNs or New York Times, and what did the data show us when we looked back at those people that were in those newsrooms? They were older, they were wealthier, they were whiter than the majority of America, and that's why they weren't hearing the views on the ground. If we look at how Snapchat covered the US elections, what did they do? Half the youth in the US are using the app. So they aggregated the voices of all of those people. I saw a young girl in Mississippi crying. I saw a young guy triumphantly celebrating when Trump had won the elections. This is almost live. It's seconds away from being live. And instead of hearing a group of pundits and commentators who got it wrong anyway and used the wrong stats and nobody called Trump winning, instead of that, I heard people on the ground. I think the benefit of mobile journalism is that it has the ability to tap into hyper local news, to tell you there's voices on the ground, and there's nothing more organic than those voices being live.
Although then there's strange things like Norway really doesn't have any social media that do the hyper-local stuff, which you do get in, like nextdoor.com, I think, in the US. Here, people try, and it doesn't seem to really work. Snapchat is apparently extremely popular in Norway, to the extent I get phone calls from experts doing reports on unnamed companies who are interested in breaking into the Norwegian market, which is like, okay. And yet there's like one live story a year out of Norway and absolutely no discovery. You're talking about maybe doing discovery content with Snapchat, right? No? Someone is? So there's this like dearth of actually producing this content.
I think the question is why is local news failing in Norway and in many parts of the world? And it seems because it's difficult to get national advertisers to advertise in Bergen or in the tiny part of Bergen. In India, it's easy, because in India, you've got
so many people.
20 million people. In Delhi, there's tons of advertisers, but it's very tricky. And I think that's where digital is going to fill the void, where we're going to plug in national and international advertisers into hyper-local stories. We can tell you about the bridge that's broken down in your community, reported by the community, and we can give you the name of the local plumber that's going to fix it. That's the beauty of social media, that it is so fragmented, and we know our audience so well of who they are and where they are, and all of these things that we're worried about in terms of surveillance, but it actually allows us to target them with very specific news that's relevant to them in their communities.
Could be Norway just has really good local newspapers compared to most of the world, and
So
they take the market.
You're saying it's that it's advertising that's making, the lack of national advertising that's making local news fail rather than lack of interest by local.
I think so. I think people are very interested.
I don't know.
And I think that the ones that do work, that they try to make work, are the freebie newspapers that they hand out in the metros in London and those sorts of things. Yeah. And even those are totally compromised by a lot of entertainment. And if you've got your local pizza shop advertising for you, then you can't say anything negative about the pizza shop. So integrity becomes an issue.
But I mean, I can see your point when it comes to sort of live news, what's happening, people on the ground, at least to a lot of people, are just as interesting or more interesting to hear than hear a journalist in Norway talking over satellite phone to his colleague in Washington who can say, I'm talking to some people on the ground in this country, and here's my summary. I understand why the other beats the old shit there. But then we still have, because that's sort of just the traditional live news reporting of what's actually happening just now. But then what about all the journalistic stuff, which is heavier, like documentaries, or, you know, where you actually have to tell the public, we've done some freedom of information requests, we got these documents out, it took us 3 months to digest it, this is what's going on. I can't see sort of the people on the ground competing in that area. But who's going to take care of that? Because what you're discussing now, you talked about the platforms. And other people have talked about the platforms. 20 years ago, the media, the publishing houses and the media were gatekeepers, basically, for anything you call mass media production. Any of us who wanted to convey something to the general public without sort of throwing out a lot of, you know, from airplanes, a little paper sheet in the middle of the town with a megaphone, you had to go through those gatekeepers, and isn't that the problem, is that this guy isn't really a gatekeeper anymore. And Mark Zuckerberg is a gatekeeper. You can call them a technological platform or an editorial platform. It doesn't matter what we call it, it's what the animal actually does. And I mean, that's the fight now when it comes to maybe the heavier stuff of putting things into context, apart from all those little bits and pieces in the puzzle where I understand that all these amateurs can deliver stuff that people find just as interesting, but putting all that information into context. Who's going to be able to afford how to do that?
I think we've hardly said anything about education systems here, but I think ultimately that's what has to change. That we're going to have to change the way people are educated in order and to help them figure out how to deal with all this information.
You know, you've collaborated with other media houses now. The Panama Papers, I know one of the Norwegian papers, which I also work for, were in that collaboration. I mean, editorial outlets internationally, they've collaborated on sort of ad hoc basis, but you see a tendency now to a lot more collaboration. You collaborate with CNN now. Is that the future? Is that the way to sort of maintain some sort of role for the heavier stuff, where you actually have to put a lot of stuff into context?
Before you answer that, Jon Arne, be prepared now. Start preparing for good point of views and arguments and questions. We'll shortly come to you. Go on, Jon Arne.
When it comes to what is trending, I think live news reporting is definitely one trend, and it's getting stronger and more important. And I haven't said anything about the ethical side of that, but I think you have some difficult questions when it comes to ethics with the living. It's the speed, for instance, and we get all these videos in, and if there is an accident, do you have time to call up the family members to tell, or are you going to find the video on the front page of a newspaper before they are told about that the family member is dead, whatever. So there is some ethical questions when it comes to the live and the speed, so the technology itself. When it comes to other things trending, we were talking about curating. We have just opened a new landing page where we have let 50, 60 bloggers be a part of that. And that is curating. We work with them. This is specialists on different issues. It's a broad-spectred political bunch of people and things like that. Well, we have lost some reporters over the years because of cost-cutting. But the thing is, we have opened much more up. We are using all kind of experts from different areas in the society. And I think that's good news. Also, when it comes to the educational part, I have to say, if I was starting out today, I wouldn't have had a chance. These people they are well educated, prepared, they have the ethical reflexes too. I wouldn't have had a chance. I'm a son of a fisherman from Finnmark, and I have been going a long way. It's good to see the standard of reporters today are very high, I have to say, and that's because they are very well educated. So.
Okay, folks, questions, remarks, arguments, point of views?
I've got some questions from the social media community.
Yes, great.
We've got Dawn, who's at the INMA, the International News Media Association, and she is asking, if you were a journalist in the US, how would you have used social media to cover the elections? Not knowing, perhaps, that the polls were wrong. And how would you use social media today to cover Trump?
So you're looking at me?
Yeah, I'm looking at all of you.
Journalist.
Omar, what did you say about Twitter and Trump to me? He's probably the guy who have...
Yeah, I was saying, I mean, Twitter by many degrees is seeing negative growth, and someone like Donald Trump is actually fueling the platform again. He's bringing it back. God forbid if Donald Trump gets on Snapchat, it'll be terrible for all of us.
I'm trying to think of something smart to say. I mean, I could be defensive and say, you know, the polls were clearly one thing. I probably don't rely on the polls, but though the polls were wrong, remember the numbers are not weren't wrong. I mean, in the sense that Hillary Clinton got 2.8 million more votes, and if you do the details, which I sort of do to do something to myself, Trump won because of 3 states, and the number of votes was a total of 80,000. If 80,000 votes had been different in those 3 states, Hillary Clinton would have won. So it's to me, it's very hard to know exactly what lessons to learn from.
I mean, what would you have learned from using social media?
Yeah, I don't know.
And what sort of figures, how would you have been able to translate any of that into meaningful figures?
So for me, if we had set up, for example, Twitter polls, and you had just hypothetically, you had the entire populace using Twitter, we would have got.
That's a premise.
If you
No, but I mean, with Snapchat, you can make those assertions because half the youth do have the app. Then you'd accurately be able to see when the email scandal dropped, exactly how many people were migrating and back and forth. That kind of analytics would be fascinating on a minute-by-minute or day-by-day basis to see how that shift was happening. And that's going to be enabled by more people getting involved in the social media process.
But I mean, Facebook obviously had that information. If they weren't analyzing it, they could have. They have sentiment analysis. They have all the tools they would need. So,
exactly.
But would they ever share that?
And were we looking in the right place? So,
and should they? In other words, I mean, polls are.
If you look at a Google Trends report on the week of the US elections, it's the most simple thing to do. The amount of people that searched vote Trump was infinitely higher than vote Hillary.
But is that what you search for if you're going to?
Well, that's what people did search for. But despite that, when we were looking to all of the pundits and the commentators and the polls, no, we did the most simple thing of looking at what people were actually looking at. So I think you're right. Facebook are not giving us all of that information. They probably have a lot of it. But I think we can start looking into some of the most simple places to find it.
So next election, we just need to look at Google Trends for vote X.
See what people are searching. And it might give us a little bit more than we knew before.
Well, the actors who do the polling traditionally, they're going to use that technology once they realize that their polls are not reliable anymore. People aren't going to pay them for their polls anymore. So I think that will sort itself out. They're used to finding out new ways of making more and more accurate polls. They've done it always. In the old days, they had phone calls. They phoned around to some representative portion of the relevant population. Now they do it electronically, and they're going to use social media, I'm sure, if they find ways of doing it better.
Though, I mean, the fact that the polls were such a big part of the news that media reported on, I mean, why? Do we really need, daily polls? Does it help democracy in any sense?
I think the most interesting thing is what was happening in society months and years before these polls, because the polls are the weeks up to the election. I mean, to put it like that, it's too late then for society to understand what's going on and for anyone being a citizen to try to change things. I mean, to do that, you have to know what's going on every day in your society. And that's, I think, where society has missed out a little bit, and the media as well.
Every day, everywhere.
Everywhere, every day.
It's not just, one place.
Isn't the issue really that both these two parties who had all this time were not able to come up with better candidates?
Well, there you go. I think you hit on it.
Yusuf, here's a question. Here's a question from me as a union guy. You said earlier today, answering a question on working as a mojo. You said you're 27. You're not doing that anymore. How long do you last as a mojo today? I mean, how long can you expect journalists working as mojos like you have told us about? I mean, can we expect our colleagues to stay for more than a couple of years?
I think the entire workflow and role of a journalist is going to shift by 2020 as we approach 5G internet. I think if we look at the way the Olympics was covered, a lot of those stories were automated. We had Usain Bolt won by this time at this venue, and within seconds an algorithm could put out a story to say what had happened. Same thing with the stock markets, same thing with the US elections in the run-up to announcing the candidate. It's very easy to automate. I call it robo-journalism. And in this age of robo-journalism, I think to survive as a news organization or as a journalist, You need to become a RoboCop journalist. You need to have your 360 camera in one hand. You need to have your Facebook Live in the other. You need to be tweeting and periscoping and flying a drone over the crowd. And the days of just being a writer or just being a photographer or just being a videographer are behind us. In terms of myself as a selfie journalist, as a mojo with my phone going out and reporting, I think those days are numbered too. I think to do authentic stories and to have more truths and more perspectives, we're going to have to move to this curation business. And that's where the creativity is actually going to come in. It's going to be so exciting to have so many angles. And after this debate, we're going to show off what it feels like to have 16 of the people in this audience who were snapping on their phones, creating one common story. And that's where I'm still playing a journalist, and I'm still playing an editor, and I'm making the decisions about which bites I used and which shots I used. And I'm very much doing the journalistic work. That hasn't changed. Ironically, after all of this, to produce a good Snapchat story, and it's a linear narrative, I have to go back to the very basics of journalism. I have to storyboard my story. I have to have structure. I have to speak to the right people. And as this entire panel has said, that doesn't change. That the ability to be a good storyteller, whether you're curating from lots of cameras, or whether you're going out with a phone, that remains the same.
Okay, questions? Arguments? Any more from...
Are you going to start using spectacles? The Snapchat spectacles with the video in the...
I absolutely am. I mean, the notion that I have to hold this up, my arm is getting tired doing this. As soon as I can get into wearable journalism, and I already do strap my camera to my head sometimes, the more I'll be able to actually engage with the world. This is a wall between me and you guys, between me and whatever I'm doing. I want to lose that wall. I want to be able to record and have my hands free to engage. So yeah, I will be on the wearable. I think if mobile journalism is today, wearable journalism is going to be tomorrow.
On the other hand, it's also a window. If I look at you on Snapchat, I see your face, which I like.
You like my face?
Oh, yeah, sure. I like everyone's face.
Jill, really,
lovely face, lovely face.
Talking about privacy. Yeah.
But Jill, where do you see the end point of your research? I mean, you talked about the difficulties of researching private rooms, actually, which they have become. Where do you see your research as the end point of it?
Well, the immediate end point is, I'm sure Snapchat's going to do a live story about the inauguration and the March on Washington the following day. So I'm going to be a very ethical researcher and not break the terms of service. So I won't record it, but I'll sit there and take copious notes of the 3 minutes or whatever. And then I'm going to write an article about the injustice of this privatized public sphere. But also, I mean, the more general endpoint, how many of you have read Dave Eggers' The Circle? Oh, well, it's also going to be a Hollywood movie in a few months' time, so watch the movie, read the book. It's about The Circle, it's like Facebook, Google, amalgamate, and sharing is caring. They value total transparency. Everyone has to wear basically like spectacle, I guess. And it has a terrible ending. He's a very skeptical man about it. It's a good read. I mean, it could really end up very badly. But in general, I love your enthusiasm. I think there's more good in this than there is evil. And it's like, I mean, any technology, a knife, you can use it for good, you can use it for evil. And I think we just need to build a society that does the good things with this.
Deborah, you had such a nice, very good opening. Can you please conclude for us?
Oh my gosh. So, we are in the process of technological change, and technological changes in technology and the technical and the social are intertwined. So, I mean, this conversation convinced me even more that we're kind of in the midst of a revolution that I don't yet see how we're going to come out of it. But things are going to change, and some things are going to get better, and some things may not. And some things may get worse, but it's going to be different.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. And then, Yusuf, I think the stage is yours and the students.
Can I steal one of the students' iPhones? Because mine is engaged in a live stream. Who's got a spare iPhone? Maybe Peter's? Is it on the Wi-Fi?
No, I can get it on.
Peter, is yours free? Because I know yours is 14. I'll take your 14%. Bring it on. So the whole purpose of what we were trying to do, thank you, Peter. Let's swap roles so you can hold the live stream as you've been doing a fantastic job of all day. And I will plug this back in up here. You guys are going to get sick of my voice by the end of this. So we had 16 students that I got an opportunity to meet yesterday for, what, an hour and a bit? And they didn't come to hear me talk. They came because they heard there was free pizza. And there was free pizza, and it was good. And that's the only reason I came as well. Anyways, we had a really, really brief period with them. And can we get this going, guys? It's AV guys on the big screen. And we just reached this conclusion that there's never been a more confusing or exciting time to be a journalist, because you get to a particular location and what do you do? Most of us only have one device and two hands. So do you tweet? Do you Instagram? Do you Periscope? Do you Facebook Live? Do you 360? What do you do? I just talked for a moment about being a RoboCop of journalists. So we're trying to equip them with that skill set to start thinking holistically about how to cover a story from many, many, many perspectives. Peter, what's your password? He doesn't want to tell us because his Tinder account is open. Swipe right. And is this still up and running? It's not working. Oh, no. Should be up. Let's have a look what the problem. Well, I was going to show you. If I can't show you, you guys can check out on. It's already online. What can I do to make our lives easier? Try my phone? Okay, let me try my phone. We'll say goodbye to the Facebook Live people. Goodbye. Thank you for watching. Come to Norway. It's a nice place. Bring a jacket. It's freezing. And I'm going to end that, and I'm going to plug my phone in here. Apparently, it's not that cold. Everyone's like, oh, it's a really warm winter. Come to India, we'll show you a warm winter. Let's see if that's any better. Any luck? Yay, celebration. Okay, everything I'm about to show you, you can see available on the sites that you guys have access to. And I'm first going to show you. So, right when we were on stage, what did I do? Because I'm an instinctive live streamer. I live streamed it. So that the debate that we've just watched was live streamed while we're sitting on stage. That got 442 views, but more interestingly, it got 32 comments. People were engaging with the content, because my following is not huge, but they're quality followers. These are journalists, these are media people. So they were all asking questions, they were discussing. This is all while we were live. These guys asked more questions than you guys asked. So that's what I did instinctively when I was on stage. Now I'm going to head to the Institute of Information. This is your guys' university account. And the first thing that we published was the live of my talk. That achieved 1,800 views, and the page only has 600 likes. So almost 3 times the amount of people that liked this page watched the live. And I think that's testament to the 30 shares. So this was earlier today, a bit like deja vu. You remember what we were just doing? And then I came up on, and have a look at that. That gives you metrics to show you exactly when people were tuning in. So there was a slow pickup. For the first 2 minutes or so, there was almost nobody. Then it almost peaked at the 3-minute point, because the Facebook channel started telling people, hey, watch this live, watch this live. And then it sort of dipped, and I can use these analytics to see when my speeches get boring, so I can cut those bits out. And it peaked at the 35-minute mark. But because of Facebook Live, I had access. I've got no idea why. But I'll find out. I'll look at the analytics. I'll see were there more men or women. How old were they? Were they in Norway? Were they around the whole of Europe? Were they from India tuning in? Who was watching the live? So the first thing we did today as the 16 students is a Facebook Live. The second thing that we did, and we did a second one on this one. Not as many views, sorry. And then we did a 360 video. So we wanted to give people the perspective of being in this room right now with us and being able to experience that.
Who's been your favorite speaker?
And this is what it looks like.
I think all of them were pretty great, but
so I can move the phone around.
I really liked Yusuf Omar.
and I can have a look.
Oh, wow. You're just saying that because I'm here. Remember, guys, you got to be loud because the mic's right on here.
There's Peter. Hello, Peter.
Very engaging. He was very energized.
You can have a look around, look at the floor,
Really fun to listen to.
look at the sky. And I think Peter gives us a tour of the room.
Good. He was had a lot of great points. And
Come
a
on,
lot
Peter.
Of, smart sentences.
Peter, take them through a tour. Show them the building.
Okay, let's go. Peter's walking. We're walking with Peter. And you guys were having lunch, and I can still have a look around. So we did a 360 video. And the whole point of a 360 is to teleport people, to give them the experience. I mean, you could conventionally do it with a headset on and be immersed in that. But the vast majority of people are going to do it just like how I did now, using your hands, scrolling around. And for me, the ideal application for that is about getting people into places where they can't get access to, like the vast majority of people don't have tickets, they can't be here, or where they don't want to be, in the middle of a protest, in the middle of a sewer, and working out how Delhi cleans all of its toilets. These sorts of stories, giving people access to weird, weird places. And then what I was most excited about, and if you like this piece, then I did it. If you don't like it, then the students did it. Where's the students? Yeah, to have a stand up. Round of applause for these guys. These guys are amazing. So these are our Snapchat superstars. I recommend you hire them for your news organizations immediately. They were Snapchatting away, and while I was on stage looking very unprofessional as I was playing on my phone, I was pulling their snaps and trying to make it into one story. I rapidly realized that 16 people can't fit into 1 minute. Do the maths, it works out to like 3 seconds each. So here's a little snippet of what their day has been like as a curated Snapchat story.
Hey guys! It's the media conference in Bergen, including Snapchat wizard Yusuf Omar. Great lineup.
I want to tell you this
Story of this conference from every angle on every platform.
So try to keep up.
For this conference, I expect to hear what's the latest.
It's extremely interesting and mind-blowing, I would say.
Mobile journalism for me is mostly today about distribution. It's very, very important.
I don't know if I fear it or if I would long for it, but no, I really don't know.
I think live stories on Snapchat are a fascinating public sphere today, but it's privatized and that's problematic.
Mojo for me is visual excitement.
I'm a mobile journalist. He's obviously a mobile journalist.
We've learned about the amazing opportunities that Snapchat brings us, both as publishers and as receivers of information.
Today's conference has really showed me how much story you can tell, even though you have limited resources.
So today has been a very inspiring day, and I definitely see Snapchat in a whole new light.
And how we can use Snapchat for journalism purposes.
It has been amazing. I've learned much about Snapchat and what the future may bring.
I think my favorite part of today was when editor-in-chief of Dagbladet told us in a very Norwegian accent that we should be optimistic about the future.
It was an amazing day. I learned so much.
I am so happy, such a kind audience, such an amazing group of people, but it's not the end, it's just the beginning.
Someone wants our attention. Last week we were reminded that we keep our lives tight.
Conference has been very inspiring.
I love this conference. It's great.
We're here because we're studying media science.
I'm working in communications. Okay, we're done. And what I've learned today is a lot about Mojo.
It's been a really good day. And now I'm going home.
Well done, guys.
This media conference, we have a lot of great people here. We have students, we have editors, we have journalists.
I would encourage you to look beyond
Who's been your favorite speaker so
the
far?
funny face filters. Look past the gimmicky text and the colors and look for the powerful storytelling application here, the ability to take so many cameras and turn them into one story, to capture so many perspectives. This generation represents the future of news. They represent the people that are going to be contextualizing our world. My advice to editors and managers and newsrooms is to not hold them back, to give them access to social media platforms. Never say no. Let them test how things can work. Let them make mistakes. It's the only way that I've ever learned to do anything is by getting it wrong sometimes and often getting it right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.